Hagar was an Egyptian servant, living on the margins of a story that was never meant to be hers. She had no title, no power, no voice of her own. In the household of Abraham and Sarah, she was not seen as a person with dreams or fears, but as property, a solution to someone else's desperation. Her body became a means to an end, her future decided in conversations she was never invited into. And when her role was fulfilled, so was her usefulness. Have you ever felt like that? Like your life was being shaped by choices you did not make, carrying burdens you never asked for while the world looked right through you? Hagar's story begins there, in silence and invisibility. Taken far from her homeland, stripped of identity, and forced into motherhood under pressure, she carried a child that symbolized hope for others but isolation for herself. Instead of protection, she found resentment. Instead of gratitude, she faced cruelty. The place that should have been her shelter became a prison, and day by day, her spirit was worn down, until one moment changed everything. Driven into the wilderness, alone and afraid, Hagar reached the breaking point where survival itself seemed uncertain. And it was there in the desert, far from comfort, far from approval, that something extraordinary happened. She was seen. Truly seen. Not by the people who controlled her life, but by God Himself. This is the story of Hagar, the only woman in the Bible who named God. She called Him El Roi, the God who sees me. And her encounter would reshape not only her destiny, but the meaning of being unseen forever. If stories of faith, resilience, and hidden strength speak to you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us as we uncover one of the most powerful, overlooked journeys in Scripture. Because this story might be more personal than you think. Once Hagar realized she was carrying Abraham's child, everything inside the household began to shift in ways no one openly named. Yet everyone felt. The air grew heavy with unspoken tension, as though the very walls of the tents could sense that something fragile had been disturbed. What was meant to solve Sarah's long years of waiting instead awakened a deeper pain, one that slowly hardened into resentment. Hagar had not asked for this role, yet her body now carried a promise that did not belong to her, and that truth changed how she was seen by everyone around her. Where she had once moved quietly, almost unnoticed, her presence now carried weight. A single glance lingered too long, a word cut a little sharper than before. Sarah's sorrow, once turned inward, began to spill outward, and Hagar stood at the center of it. Each passing day reminded Sarah of what she could not have, and each reminder sharpened her frustration. What began as silence turned into harshness, and harshness into cruelty that wore down Hagar's spirit one moment at a time. The place she had been forced to call home became increasingly hostile, and the safety she never truly had slipped even further away. Hagar felt the weight of contradiction pressing in from all sides. She was carrying life, yet her own life felt more fragile than ever. She was fulfilling the expectations placed upon her, yet paying for it with isolation and fear. No one asked how she slept at night or whether the child growing inside her stirred hope or dread. She was seen only as a problem that had grown too large to ignore. And in that tension, her dignity was quietly eroded, not in a single moment, but through countless small acts that made her feel smaller with each day. Abraham, caught between responsibility and distance, did not intervene. His silence, though less visible, cut deeply. It left Hagar exposed to Sarah's authority with no shield and no voice. The promise that had once been spoken under the stars now unfolded in shadows. Far from wonder and reassurance, Hagar's body bore the evidence of that promise. Yet she carried it alone. The child within her became both her burden and her only companion, a steady reminder that there was no turning back. Eventually, the pressure became unbearable. The tension in the camp was no longer something she could endure quietly. Each breath felt heavier, each step more uncertain, until survival itself demanded a choice. With no plan and no protection, Hagar did the only thing left to her. She ran, not toward safety, but away from pain, away from voices that stripped her of worth, away from a future that felt increasingly dangerous to face. The desert did not welcome her. It offered no comfort, no clear path forward. Heat pressed down relentlessly, and the silence felt louder than any accusation she had left behind. She was alone, pregnant, and far from anything familiar, carrying a life that depended entirely on her strength even as her own strength faltered. Every step into the wilderness felt like stepping beyond the edge of what she knew how to endure. Yet it was in that desolation, far removed from the household that had defined her suffering, that Hagar's story began to change. The wilderness stripped away every illusion of control, leaving only raw vulnerability and unanswered questions. But it also became the place where her pain could no longer be ignored, where the weight she carried was no longer hidden behind others' expectations. In fleeing into the desert, Hagar unknowingly walked toward the moment that would redefine her existence, not as a servant, not as a solution, but as a person whose life and suffering were about to be seen. The wilderness stretched endlessly before Hagar, a vast silence broken only by the sound of her own breathing and the slow, steady rhythm of life within her. Each step carried her farther from the world she knew and deeper into uncertainty. The desert offered no answers. Only heat, thirst, and the frightening sense that she had slipped beyond the reach of every human voice. Here, there were no tents, no commands, no expectations placed upon her body or her future. There was only emptiness, and the growing realization that she could not survive on strength alone. It was in that fragile moment, when exhaustion pressed against her chest and despair threatened to overtake her, that something extraordinary happened. A voice broke the silence, not harsh, not demanding, but clear and purposeful. It spoke her name. Not servant, not foreigner, not property. Hagar. For the first time since leaving her homeland, she was addressed not by her role, but by her identity. The sound of her own name carried weight, as if it reached into the parts of her that had long been ignored. The messenger before her was unlike anyone she had ever encountered. There was a presence about him that made the desert itself feel suddenly smaller, as though the vast emptiness had been interrupted by something eternal. He did not approach her with blame or accusation. Instead, he asked where she had come from and where she was going, not because he lacked knowledge, but because her story mattered. In that question, Hagar was given space to be seen, not as a problem to be managed, but as a person whose pain deserved acknowledgement. As she spoke, the weight she had been carrying poured out, not only in words but in tears she had no longer reason to hold back. The suffering she had endured, the fear that had driven her into the wilderness, and the uncertainty that clouded her future were all laid bare. And she discovered something she had never known before. Her pain had not gone unnoticed. The God who ruled the promises spoken to Abraham had also been watching her steps. He had heard what no one else listened for. He had seen what others chose to overlook. Then came the promise, spoken not vaguely, but with purpose. Her future would not end in the desert. The child she carried was not a mistake nor an afterthought. He would grow, and from him would come descendants too numerous to count. Life, not loss, would define what lay ahead. Even her suffering was not meaningless. Her son already had a name. Ishmael, a living declaration that God hears. Every cry, every whispered prayer, every unspoken fear had reached heaven. The message did not erase her hardship, but it transformed it. Hagar was told to return, to walk back into a place marked by difficulty. Yet she was no longer the same woman who had fled in silence. She returned with a promise anchored beyond human approval, carrying within her the knowledge that she was not alone. The God who spoke to her in the wilderness would go with her into whatever awaited. Overwhelmed by what she had encountered, Hagar responded not with arguments or demands, but with reverence. She named the one who had met her there, calling him El Roi, the God who sees. It was a confession born from experience, not theory. She had been seen at her lowest point, in a place where survival itself felt uncertain. The desert, once a symbol of abandonment, became sacred ground, marked forever by divine attention. In that encounter, Hagar's identity was reshaped. She was still a servant, still vulnerable, still facing a difficult road ahead, but she was no longer invisible. The wilderness had revealed a truth that would carry her forward. Even when human systems fail, even when promises seem distant, the God who sees does not look away. Hagar returns to the household she once fled, not because her circumstances have suddenly become gentle, but because something within her has changed. She carries more than a child now. She carries a promise. The journey back is quieter than her escape into the desert, yet heavier with meaning. Each step is guided by the knowledge that her life is no longer invisible, that the God who met her in the wilderness did not speak empty words. When her time comes, she gives birth to a son, and she names him Ishmael. God hears. The name itself becomes a living testimony, a declaration spoken every time her child is called, a reminder that her cries in the wilderness were not lost to the wind. Life not transformed overnight. Hagar remains a servant, still positioned on the margins of a household shaped by power and hierarchy. Yet motherhood reshapes her inner world. When she looks at Ishmael, she does not see only a child born of complex human decisions. She sees evidence of divine attention. His breath, his cries, his growth all confirm the promise spoken beside a desert spring. The God who saw her had also committed himself to her son's future, and that assurance becomes an anchor for her soul. Ishmael grows, and with him grows Hagar's understanding of what it means to live under divine care. She does not know the full shape of what lies ahead, but she knows enough to endure the present. The promise of countless descendants is not something she can measure or control, yet it reframes her identity. She is no longer only a woman shaped by exploitation and abandonment. She is a mother entrusted with a future that stretches beyond her own lifetime, connected to a story far larger than the walls of Abraham's household. In quiet moments, Hagar reflects on the name she gave God in the wilderness, El Roi, the God who sees. That name follows her into daily routines, into long hours of work, into the ordinary rhythms of raising a child. It becomes her silent assurance that visibility does not depend on status, and worth is not defined by social position. Even when human eyes overlook her, divine attention does not waver. Ishmael's very existence reinforces that truth, reminding her that God's promises are not reserved only for those at the center of the story. As years, uncertainty remains part of her reality, but fear no longer defines it. Hagar lives with the steady conviction that her son's life is held by something stronger than circumstance. Ishmael's name speaks every time she worries about his future, every time questions rise about belonging, inheritance, or identity. God hears. God sees. God remembers. These are not abstract ideas to her. They are lived experience, written into her journey from the wilderness back into the world. Hagar's story does not end in comfort or power, but in assurance. She walks forward knowing that her life and her son's future rest under divine care, shaped by a God who intervenes not only in grand moments, but in the quiet resilience of survival. Through Ishmael, Hagar learns that being seen by God is not a temporary encounter, but a lasting relationship, one that continues to unfold long after the desert has been left behind. Time passes. Promises linger, yet the fragile balance of the household eventually breaks. Once again, Hagar finds herself forced to leave, this time not alone, but with Ishmael beside her. The departure is heavier than before. She is no longer a solitary woman running from pain. She is a mother responsible for a child whose future once carried divine assurance. With limited provisions and no clear destination, they walk into the wilderness. The same vast silence that once witnessed her tears now stretching endlessly before them. The desert shows no mercy. Water dwindles. Strength fades. And the sun presses down with relentless intensity. Hagar pushes forward as long as she can, driven by instinct and determination. But the limits of the human body eventually assert themselves. When the last of the water is gone, hope seems to evaporate with it. Ishmael, still young, grows weak, his voice rising in distress. Hagar cannot bear to watch him suffer. She places him under a shrub, stepping away just far enough that she does not have to witness what she fears is inevitable. Her grief is quiet, heavy, and exhausted, shaped not by sudden panic but by the slow collapse of expectation. Yet even here, at the edge of despair, the meaning of Ishmael's name unfolds once more. His cries rise into the open sky, echoing across the barren land, and they do not go unheard. Scripture does not describe a dramatic rescue, but something more profound. God hears the voice of the boy, not because Ishmael is powerful, privileged, or protected by human systems, but because divine attention does not abandon those the world casts aside. In this moment, God speaks again, calling Hagar by name as he did years earlier near the spring. The voice is not distant or condemning, but steady and reassuring. She is reminded of the promise spoken long ago, that her son would grow into a great nation, that his life had meaning beyond the present danger. God opens her eyes, and suddenly she sees what had been there all along: a well of water, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be revealed at the right moment. Hagar runs to it, filling her container, giving Ishmael water, watching life return to his body. The desert that had seemed like an ending becomes a place of continuation. This second rescue mirrors the first, reinforcing a pattern that defines her story. Human rejection followed by divine intervention. Abandonment answered by presence. Silence broken by response. From that day forward, Hagar understands something deeper than survival. God's care is not limited to a single encounter or a single promise fulfilled. It follows her across years, across deserts, across moments when the future appears closed off. Ishmael grows stronger, and God remains with him, shaping his path in ways unseen but intentional. Mother and son learn to live beyond the margins, sustained not by security or certainty, but by trust forged through experience. This second wilderness does not erase the first. It completes it. The God who once revealed himself as El Roi proves again that seeing also means acting, and hearing leads to provision. Hagar's life becomes a testimony written across deserts and wells, reminding us that divine faithfulness is not bound to comfort, but often revealed most clearly where hope seems thinnest. Ishmael grows into adulthood shaped not by palaces or privilege, but by survival, resilience, and the quiet guidance of God. He becomes skilled in the wilderness, learns to live with strength and independence, and eventually fathers a great nation, just as God promised long before his birth. His life stands as evidence that destiny is not limited to those at the center of power, and that divine purpose can unfold far from the places history usually celebrates. Through Ishmael, the promise spoken to a fleeing servant woman proves true, unfolding across generations in ways she could never have fully imagined. Hagar's story, though often told at the edges of larger narratives, carries a weight that echoes through time. She was never meant to be remembered as a central figure, yet her encounter with God reshapes how we understand divine attention. She is the first person in Scripture to give God a name born from personal experience, calling him El Roi, the God who sees. That name does not emerge from comfort or security, but from pain, isolation, and the wilderness. It is spoken by someone who knew what it meant to be overlooked by society, yet fully seen by God. Her life becomes a lasting testimony that suffering does not disqualify anyone from God's care. When human systems failed her, when protection vanished and the future seemed impossible, God remained present. He heard the cries of her son, revealed provision where none seemed to exist, and stayed faithful across years marked by uncertainty. Hagar's journey reminds us that God's promises are not fragile, nor dependent on ideal circumstances. They endure through rejection, delay, and hardship, often unfolding slowly and quietly rather than all at once. The wilderness, in Hagar's story, is not merely a place of danger. It becomes a place of revelation. It is where God speaks names, restores dignity, and opens eyes to hidden wells of provision. It is where despair is met with assurance, and where survival transforms into purpose. Through Hagar and Ishmael, we are reminded that God's faithfulness does not end when life becomes difficult. In many, it becomes most visible there. As this story comes to a close, it leaves us with a powerful truth. No one is truly unseen, no cry is ignored, and no promise spoken by God is ever wasted. Hagar's life stands as a witness across generations that God sees the overlooked. He is suffering and fulfills His word, even in the most desolate places. Thank you for listening and taking this journey through one of the Bible's most profound and often overlooked stories. If this story moved you, encouraged you, or gave you a new perspective, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing meaningful stories that speak to the heart and remind us of enduring hope.